Several years ago when we did the L92 engine swap in our 66 GTO, the car was equipped with a rack and pinion steering system. And this allowed us to use the stock accessory brackets that came from the Cadillac Escalade because there wasn't any interference problems with the stuff up next to the engine. Turns out, after several years of the owner driving this car, he really didn't like the rack and pinion steering system, so he wanted to go back to a stock style steering system with an updated Delphi 600 steering gear. The problem is this Delphi 600 steering gear is going to live where the power steering pump from the Cadillac was. Fortunately for us, Holley's come up with a new set of accessory brackets that make LS swaps into older cars a little more affordable and a little easier. They've got several configurations for different engine placements and different engines. You can even have an air conditioning kit. What's really great about these brackets is because all LS engines share a common architecture, which means all the bolt holes are in the same place. Holley can make one bracket and then you just buy an appropriate spacer kit to mount it for different pulley spacings. As the bracket comes out of the box, it's designed to fit directly on the original LS one out of a Corvette. But there's two spacer kits to make it fit on the other two water pump options. The middle spacer option would fit an F-body or GTO accessory drive, and the long spacer kit fits late model Camaros or trucks. And since the L92 is a truck engine out of a Cadillac Escalade, we went with the long offset kit. The basic Holley kit actually only includes the brackets and the hardware. The alternator, the power steering pump, the reservoir, and the power steering pulley are all available through Holley, but you do have the option to either reuse your old ones or pick up new ones from your local parts store. We're actually going to start at the back page of the instruction manual, which kind of seems a little counterintuitive, but because of the power steering pulley we chose with the open face design, it's easier to press the pulley onto the pump outside the car, and then you can slide the bolts for the pump through the pulley. When you press the pulley onto the pump, there's actually a special tool for it, which is not terribly expensive, but if you're only going to need it the one time, you can actually rent it from a local parts store a lot of times, and it makes it a lot easier. You don't want to end up putting this in a press and smashing the shaft into the pump and ruining your pump. So what this does is it threads a little stud into the shaft, and then it's got this bearing, and that will allow the pulley to be pressed onto the shaft without harming the pump. What's really cool about these Holley brackets is they look like a factory GM bracket, which isn't necessarily the most stylish thing, but sometimes you just want a clean and simple install when you're doing a motor swap. The first step to actually install the brackets on the car is to locate the correct length bolts, which Holley gives you in the instructions what lengths you need based on your install kit. And then if you're using the spacer for a longer alignment than the standard LS1, you need to locate your spacer. The first step to actually installing the brackets on the motor is, of course, to get yourself some anti-seize. We want to do this because when we torque the bolts, we want to make sure the threads are lubricated, and that makes sure that we get an accurate torque reading, and it also prevents the steel bolts from seizing in the aluminum head should you ever have to take this apart again. After you've got the anti-seize on your bolts, you need to stack up these three pieces: the bracket, the appropriate spacer if that's needed for your application, and if you're using the stock style power steering reservoir, the reservoir bracket. After you've got the bolts snugged down, Holley recommends a torque of 36 foot-pounds on the 10mm bolts, and it's always good to have a good torque wrench and torque things to spec. Make sure that they're never going to come out unless you want them to. The next step is to install the power steering pump. The first thing to do there is take this little reinforcing bracket and slide it onto the pump, and then we need to install a short bolt through the side there. After that, we're going to put anti-seize on the longer bolts and drop them through the pump. And we're going to go hang this on the car. Now we'll take the last short bolt and install it through that reinforcing bracket and into the main bracket. This point here is also a good time to note that there's two different size pulley options that can be used on the power steering pump. Some cars that may have the engine set farther back in relation to the control arms may have an interference problem with the larger pulley. In our case, the larger pulley fit better and work better for the needs of this car. The last thing to do on the power steering pump itself is to torque the fasteners to 18 foot-pounds. It's important to note that Holley provides 2 holes for this idler pulley, and that's to allow a 1/2 inch of belt adjustment. And Holley doesn't actually tell you what size belt to get because of the different pulley combinations that you may end up with. They recommend starting with the hole closest to the crank, and then if you have to move it out later on to get a belt to fit, to do that at that time. Once you've got the idler pulley installed, the next thing you need to do is install the alternator. And it's important to note that Holley sends Allen head bolts for this, because if you used a standard bolt, you'll end up with some belt interference. And as always, torque your fasteners to spec. Once you've got the alternator mounted, the next thing Holley recommends you do is take a piece of string and wrap it around the pulleys following their belt routing diagram, and then measure it. And that way you have a number you can call your local parts store with and get an appropriate belt. This part's not in the instructions, but it's always good, in my opinion, to get a couple belt sizes on either side, but you only make one trip to the parts store. The next thing is to hang your power steering reservoir on the bracket. Once you've got the belt figured out and your reservoir mounted, the last thing you need to do is make a high pressure power steering line. There's a variety of ways to do this. Some local parts stores will make high pressure lines. The other thing that we generally do is we'll get a piece of stainless Earl's hydraulic hose and the appropriate hose ends and make a line that fits from the pump to our steering gear. You can learn more about Holley's line of LS accessory brackets at holley.com.